Come all you fair and tender maids that flourish in your prime. Beware, beware, keep your gardens fair. Let no man steal your time. Let no man steal your time. For when your time is past and gone, you care no more for you. And in the place where your time was laid, he'll spread all over with blue. He will spread all over with blue. A woman is a branchy tree, and man's a clinging vine, and from the branches carelessly he'll take what he can find. He will take what he can find. Come all you fair and tender maids that flourish in your prime. Beware, beware, keep your garden fair. Let no man steal your time. Let no man steal your time. Let no man steal your time.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming and joining us. That tune is Let No Man Steal Your Time. Band is Mirage. Musicians, Pete Siddons, Tony McDonald, Penny McDonald. The CD is Down at the Old Full Moon, and it's from a private collection. It's nice to have everyone with us tonight. We know there's a lot of things going on, and our hearts and prayers are with a lot of you out there in these firelands. So thanks for coming in. I'm Darlene Hamilton. We are the Historical Tea and Dance Society. I have the fabulous Lindsay Verbal assisting with the program, handling media and our attendee questions. And questions should be submitted in the chat box of both platforms, Zoom and Facebook. Renee Turner is monitoring Zoom for questions and posting, and Larry Hansen is monitoring Facebook Live chat and posting. Stick around for the after talk. It's posted on Historical Tea and Dance Friends or in the email full of links that you got. I want to give a shout out, thank you to Karen Axelrod, Rachel Bell, and Eric Martin for their fabulous concert tonight. And I just realized I was so busy listening to the concert, I forgot to cut out my little cards. I'm so embarrassed. So the first thing isn't going to have a card, but I'm going to run and cut them while Louise is talking to us.
We're going to do arts and crafts with 5 things today. This is fun.
I'm so embarrassed, but the concert was so good. Anyway, let me go into a bio. Louise Siddons has been a teacher and organizer of historic dance, social dance since 2008 and calls Contra English country dance throughout the United States and the United Kingdom. She was the inaugural recipient of CDSS Judson Foster Award, and as a result, she led a week-long workshop for emerging English country dance leaders at Pinewoods English Week in 2016. We'll be hearing a little bit more about that later. Louise is on the board for the Friends of Cecil Sharp House in London, and also on the board of Scissortail Traditional Dance, which organizes dances throughout Oklahoma. For Scissortail, she runs a monthly collar workshop series and has created both the new Contra Dance Collar Starter Kit and her famous Wednesday walkthroughs workshops. Please welcome Louise Siddons. So glad to have you with us tonight, Louise.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I should start by saying thank you to you, Darlene, and also to Lindsay and everyone else on the Historical Tea and Dance Society team. You guys do an amazing job, and I'm honored to be on your guest list.
New Contra Dance Collar Starter Kit and her famous Wednesday walkthroughs.
All right, it's good to know that the Facebook live stream is going. We got that.
Right, exactly. Hello, Facebook.
Okay. Louise,
So,
you're going to do an intro. Lindsay, why don't you then introduce thing one? And I'm going to go run and cut those cards really fast. Okay, I'll be right back.
sounds good. Yeah, so I wanted to start just by saying my overarching theme for today and probably for my whole life is that it's our responsibility and our privilege to see possibility in the past. So that's sort of my thing zero, is that idea of finding possibility in the past. So each of my things tonight is about a place in my past and how it informs me in the present. I really think that place has meaning. And to explain what kind of meaning place has for me, I actually have a quote from Douglas Adams's novel, The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, which I realized as I was putting this together is a very appropriate title for this event. But that book, it's a book about a woman called Kate Schechter. And at one point in the book, she goes into a park outside her home. And so the quote goes, "Kate did what she always did when entering the park, which was to bob down and put the flats of her hands down on the ground for a moment. She had never quite worked out why she did this, and often she would adjust a shoe or pick up a piece of litter as a pretext for the movement. But all she really wanted was to feel the grass and the wet earth on her palms. So I literally do this when I go back to places that I've lived. I like touching the ground. But I also think that it's a metaphor, and that for us as dancers, as organizers, as human beings, it's really important every now and then to stop and put your hands on the metaphorical ground and remember where you are and why you're there. So that's my frame for my 5 things.
I love that. It's beautiful. All right, and thing one. New York, folk is a political act.
So the introductory music, you may have noticed when Darlene said who the musicians were, it was a band, Mirage, that my father was in. And both of my parents were pretty active in the British folk revival. They met in Bristol, in England, and my dad was a guitarist, he was a drummer, he played, as you can see in the photo here, at the Troubadour Folk Music Club. I don't know if that's exactly where my parents met, but it's certainly where they hung out for quite a few years. And in addition to playing in Mirage, he also played as a session player for all kinds of famous bands. He went through Bristol's folk scene in the 60s was pretty excellent, and 70s. So we moved to New York from the UK when I was in 3rd grade via Canada, technically. And as soon as we got to the US, my parents started introducing us to American folk music. And that really meant traditional songs. So my dad, I think, bought a copy of Alan Lomax's book, Folk Songs of North America, and we started to flip through them. Every weekend we would just sit down and pick songs out of that book and sing them with each other. I'm not a great singer. The rest of my family is very musical, and I'm sort of the, I don't know, the genetic anomaly. But despite the fact that I don't have a great singing voice, what we learned from what we called the sing songs was that music is participatory, and it doesn't matter what it sounds like as long as you're having fun. Of course, then they were musicians, so they did sometimes care what it sounded like, and then I left the room. But I wanted to, a few years ago, I convinced them as a Christmas present to me to sit us down and record some of these songs that we used to sing as kids. So I wanted to play you just a snippet of that. It was a completely unedited, we just sat down and did a dozen songs off the cuff, and my brother, I think, put it together, and he left in all the commentary and all the accidents. And I just wanted to play you the first couple minutes off of that CD that we put together.
As I was going over a Kilgore mountains, met Colonel Pepper and his funny people scouting. I deployed my pistol and I had my secret thing spanned into the car. And all the secret by shattering a rare mouth. Where cold daddy-o, there's whiskey in the dark.
So what you hear there is, that's obviously Whiskey in the Jar. It's a pretty well-known and very popular folk song. Metallica covered it. All kinds of people who you wouldn't expect to be singing folk have covered this song. And so what you're hearing there is, some of us are looking at the book and the words that Alan Lomax wrote down as lyrics, and some of us are just singing the words we think we know, and it's chaos, and we're all making faces at each other and laughing. And that's kind of, that was our lesson, right? Is music is participatory. But for me, as it maybe sounds from what I've said already, I struggled to figure out where I fit into that. It was one thing to be sitting in our living room and laughing with each other, but out in the real world, I went through instrument after instrument. I took piano lessons until 3rd grade, and I hated them. And then I took violin for a while, and that wasn't really my instrument. And so I switched to recorder, which I loved, but then we didn't have recorder club after 5th grade. And so I played clarinet. So all through middle school, this is me in 8th grade, as part of Frosty and the Flakes was our sort of, because we didn't have marching band or anything like that, this was our little troupe of band players, and we would go out to nursing homes and things like that and play Christmas carols to them. So I still have my clarinet. The only thing I can still play on it is Memory from Cats, which probably is appalling our whole audience right now. But I don't really play an instrument. And so it wasn't until I started dancing that I realized that I had a place kind of in participatory music, and that was going to be as a dancer, and then later even as a caller. But the idea that it was supposed to be participatory was really important. And the other thing that I learned was that there was a whole history of American culture in folk songs. Even the cover of Folk Songs of North America, there's those different images of people on the front cover of the book. And what you learn from folk songs, especially, I spent a lot of time as a kid reading Alan Lomax's commentary throughout that book, is that the history of American culture is a history of labor. And because it's America, that means it's also a history of race and class in interesting and intersecting ways. And in folk music, those people got to tell their stories, whereas in history class, those were not stories that I was hearing. So I was yeah, I was pretty invested in that idea of kind of folk as an everyman's or every person's history. Um, so I went to college. I went upstate so I can stay in New York. I can stay in Thing One. And at Cornell, I became an art history major. And I did that in part because I took an American art history class, and I realized that American art was like the folk music of the art world. People think of art as really elitist. But for me, art was inclusive. Again, it was showing me images of the histories of people that were not in my history classes. Eventually, I became a women's studies major, and then those people were in my history classes. But at first, art seemed to have everyone who I was much more interested in than politicians and military figures and things like that. And so I wanted to kind of share an example of how that happened. So we're going to look at an Edward Hopper painting. And it's a painting of two women. They're in, the title of the painting is Chop Suey. They're in a restaurant. They're going to eat a meal together. And I look at this painting and I see a painting of a lesbian couple. And you might say to me, Louise, this painting is from 1929. What are the actual chances that that's a lesbian couple in that image? That's wishful thinking on your part. But also in 1929, Reginald Marsh made a series of prints that depicted lesbian women dancing together in a club that was called the Chop Suey. And so it's not proof, but for me, it is enough evidence that I am perfectly willing to look at Hopper's painting and say, okay, there are people who would have looked at this painting in 1929 and they would have seen a lesbian couple. The fashion is the same. And the Chop Suey seems like too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence. So what I learned from that is that what you see is going to depend on what you bring to an image. There is not an art historian who has said, at least in writing, that painting has anything to do with lesbian culture. But you know, as I was putting together this talk, I was thinking about what is the pithy example I can find of how art history tells this story. And now I'm like, maybe I need to write an article about this Edward Hopper painting. Because it's like, oh no, more work. But I really want to think that through a little more. Of course, when we bring things to artwork, we're not just bringing our insights, we're also bringing our assumptions. And so when later I was teaching an American art history class, and I showed my students a painting by William Sidney Mount called Country Dance After a Sleigh Ride. And the first time that I looked at that painting, I saw social hierarchy. I saw people who were dressed for a dance. It was a social event. I saw Mount using stereotypes to indicate that these were not kind of the upper crust of society. They are country people getting dressed up in a way that maybe isn't frequently done for them. And then I saw the African-American people in the image. They're on the margins. They are in positions of servitude. And so I thought, oh, there's a hierarchy here that is totally typical for antebellum America. It's a racial hierarchy. And it's a class hierarchy. I know what I'm looking at, I thought. And then I read Chris Smith's book. He's a vernacular music historian at Texas Tech. And he wrote a book called The Creolization of American Culture that's about William Sidney Mount. He pointed out that Mount was a collector of traditional music. He was someone who had a lot of respect for musicians and for traditional tunes, and was really thinking hard about that history. Also points out, and a lot of people much more recently have pointed out as well, that the fiddle player was often also the caller. And so looking at that painting again later as a dancer and as someone who's informed by my colleagues in traditional music history, suddenly the script is flipped on that painting. That the violin player is the one who's probably telling the dancers what to do, who is in charge basically of the dance. And we all know as dancers that the music is often the thing that is most important in the room in terms of governing our experience. So it's not necessarily that they had any kind of real, I don't want to say real, they didn't have any power in the sense of they were almost certainly enslaved. They were in a situation that they hadn't chosen. But in terms of that specific room and space, at least the fiddle player in that room is the one who has the most kind of cultural power in that moment. And Mount may well have seen him that way. So that is a way that I think art history can surprise us. And so my kind of takeaway from thing one is that our responsibility is not just to see possibility in the past, but it's also to recognize everyone else's perceptions of that past, to recognize that a diversity of perspectives on the past enriches our engagement with it and helps us understand it better. And so I think that we should be open to that, obviously. Which leads me to thing two.
Thing two. California. Yes, and?
So thing two is California, and I went to California to go to Stanford for grad school. And I have to say I was mostly a grad student, but nearing the end of my PhD, I started taking swing classes, and I loved swing dancing. I don't know, it wasn't my idea to take swing lessons, but I went along with it and discovered that I loved it. And that was the first dancing that I did since I was a very small child. And so I was swing dancing, and that was going really well. And then a couple of my friends convinced me to go to Dickens Fair, which the Bay Area people in the audience will recognize that experience. You walk into the Cow Palace in San Francisco, and it's transformed into kind of a Dickensian Victorian London. And the first thing you encounter is Fezziwig's Christmas Party. And it's a dance floor, and they do a variety of dances, and they pull in people who are coming to the fair as audience members. And so someone dragged me in and made me waltz. Well, they didn't have to try very hard. He said, "Would you like to waltz?" And I said, "Yes, I would." I thought I knew how to waltz. My mother had taught me how to box step, and so I was pretty confident. I was not dressed for it. I was wearing Doc Martens, and I was, you know, I don't know, not in any kind of state to start waltzing. But there I went, and I started box stepping confidently, and I was stepping on his feet, and it was terrible. And I was like, "Oh, my waltz is not your waltz." He was doing rotary. I thank goodness for swing lessons, because I was like, okay, my job here is to follow. And as soon as I stopped trying to box step and started following his lead, we had a beautiful waltz, and it was an amazing experience. So I was like, oh, this historic dance thing. I was not a fan of the costumes, but I was a huge fan of the dancing. And so I sought it out. And of course, at Stanford, those of you who have danced in the Bay Area also will know Richard Powers is right there. And so I had the opportunity to take a bunch of historic dance classes and workshops with him, and really just dug into couples dancing, particularly 19th century dance. The other thing I did, the guy who asked me to waltz turned out to be an improv theater teacher. And so I don't know how, but we stayed friends after that Dickens Fair experience, I guess because the waltz was that good, right? And somehow I got on his mailing list for his improv classes. And I was working, they were in Berkeley and I was working in Berkeley, and I was like, what the heck, I have a free afternoon, and they were drop-in, so I didn't have to commit. And so I just went to one. And I thought, what am I doing? I'm not a stage person. At that point in grad school, I didn't think that I wanted to be a teacher. I was going to be a curator. I was going to be the person behind the scenes who you never saw. You know, I'd done tech crew in high school for our theater program, but I'd never, ever even wanted to be on stage. And there I was in an improv class. And the nice thing about the class is there is no stage, there's no audience, it's just you all. And I realized pretty quickly, and Kalia had talked in her 5 things about improv, and this idea that the first rule of improv is that you say yes and to keep the story going. And for me, it wasn't so much that rule as the realization that no one in that room wanted me to fail. they didn't just want me to say yes and that's a useful life lesson. They wanted me to be funny. And if I was funny, it meant they could be funny too. And so there was this sense of teamwork that really stayed with me. And so I want to give you 3 examples of what I mean by sort of the safety of knowing that everyone's on the same team. The first one goes along with a photo. I curated an exhibition that traveled to the Nordic Watercolor Museum, which is on an island off of the coast of Gothenburg in Sweden. And because I was going all the way to Sweden from California, I thought I better go for a long time. So I went for a month and traveled all over Scandinavia. And because I was going to be there for so long, I looked up dancing. And I found the Gothenburg Folk Dance Club, which was in this little park in Gothenburg. And so I trekked over there, and I was early, and I got to the park, and I looked around, and it was a small park, and there was just this one little trailer kind of building in the back of the park. And I thought, well, if they're going to dance somewhere, it's going to have to be in that building. So I went over and I hung out, and I waited for someone to show up, and someone finally showed up and you know, asked me if they could help. I assume that's what they asked. They were speaking Swedish, and I was like, hi, I'm here from America, and I am looking for the dance. And luckily, everyone in Sweden speaks English, so they were like, oh, fantastic, come in, dance with us. And in about an hour and a half, I did my first hombo. I did a whole bunch of folk dances I'd never done before. But then at one point with that photo, they said, you know, you're going to want to sit this dance out. And because the whole time they had been so welcoming, and just, I mean, with the hombo, I was like, well, I don't know if I can do that. And they're like, psh, you can do it. Just hold on. And it worked perfectly. And those of you who've homboed know that that's pretty amazing. That means the person that leading me was doing a really good job. So they said, sit it out. And I'm like, okay, I know you're on my team because you've been letting me do all of the things, but you're saying, don't do this one. And then as you saw in the photo, people's legs were going in the air. And I was like, oh yeah, that was probably a good call. I would not want that to happen to me unexpectedly. And it was safer to be on the sidelines, and I got kind of a cool photo. The second example is a video, and I think we can watch it first. It is of Farnacle Huggy, and we did it at Heydays last summer in 2019. Let's watch a little bit of it first. So that's Andrew Shaw's reconstruction of Farnacle Huggy from his 2009 book of the same name. Essentially what happened is Mary Luckhart wanted to make a video of Farnacle Huggy. There was no video at that time. There's a few out there now. So she came to me and said, will you call this dance for us if we put together a group of people who are willing to learn it? And so we had about 45 minutes, and Farnacle Huggy, as you saw in that video, it's a beautiful dance. It is a complicated dance, and it's not one that's necessarily full of intuitive flow. And so we just, we got musicians together. You probably saw Chip Prince, who was here last week, on the keyboard, and they were on board, and the dancers were on board, and I was on board. And we just did it. And it was one of those things where, again, if all of us had not been working working together and kind of on the same team, we would not have been able to make that happen. And it was just a really beautiful kind of unexpected moment in this week. The last example I want to give of kind of saying yes because you feel confident about the people you're saying yes with is a video of Zoom dancing. And this is another short clip, just a quick example of me teaching a dance at one of our very first Zoom dances.
The first figure in the original is a mirror hay. And if there are two of you, you can do that. You can just walk the ones part of a mirror hay as you would. But if you're dancing alone, it's the exact same track as doing a figure 8 up and down the set. So you start by going in towards your partner, and then you just walk a figure 8 down the hall, coming back up and ending at home.
So that was just the very first part of Sharon Green's reconstruction of Cloister Gardens, which is her version of Kelstern Gardens. And the point that I wanted to make there is that as we started to Zoom dance, the responsibility, I think, of the caller is that you have to think about the experience of people who are dancing alone, who are dancing in a new situation. So that was the beginning of me formulating this idea of positional dancing, which will come up later. But again, for the kind of takeaway there, I think it's about supporting each other. And it's an ideal that we hold, you know, dancers, we want to be good to each other. We want to be supportive on the dance floor, but we don't always live up to that ideal. And I think that it really makes an event more magical when everyone feels like they are doing something together and for a shared goal. So that leads us to thing 3.
Thing 3, Michigan, the usable past.
So I had discovered improv in California, and then I moved to Michigan because in addition to discovering improv, I discovered that actually I really, really, really love teaching. And I missed it horribly. I was working at a museum. I had achieved my curatorial dream and I didn't hate it, but I did not love it. And I missed the classroom. So I moved to Michigan to teach at Michigan State. The first semester, it was sort of like grad school all over again. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I just practiced teaching and prepped for classes. But then in the spring, I didn't have nearly as much work to do. I was teaching a couple of the same classes again, so I didn't have those preps. And I found myself sitting around in my little tiny studio apartment thinking, what am I gonna do? And Julie Levy-Weston is a Contra dance caller in Lansing. And she posted information about the Contra dances to one of the Michigan State listservs that I was on, a public humanities listserv. And it was free for first timers. So I thought, okay, I don't really know what Contra dancing is, but I Googled it. I was watching videos. I was like, it looks kind of fun. Looks a little bit like swing dancing. Maybe I will go do that. So I went to a Contra dance, fell in love immediately, started looking up all of the trad dance things that I could find. And overnight started to identify as a Contra dancer. One of the classes that I was teaching was a class called Space and Place in the Arts of the Americas. And because it was a general education course, I had a lot of field trips involved so that all the kind of engineering majors who had to take it would not be bored out of their minds. We went, one of the places we went was to Henry Ford's Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. And for those of you who've never been there, he basically collected buildings from all over. Some of them were really famous or had famous residents. They weren't famous buildings in themselves, but people's like birthplaces and things like that. But he also has a Cotswold cottage there. He just assembled this village. Of course, a lot of you probably know that he also had a dance hall in Greenfield Village because he was a big fan of Contra and square dancing and what he thought of as kind of traditional American dance. So in Space and Place, we used architecture to think about how we interact with, how our bodies interact with space. Going into different kinds of buildings, we could think about how we were in those buildings and what that felt like. So I started teaching with dance, and actually ended up writing an article for CDSS News about it, which I think we have a picture of. And, oh, so there you go. That's in CDSS News. You guys can look it up because you probably can't read it on the screen. But it looks like maybe there's a question.
Actually, I just wanted to point out that this is one of those situations where we're going to use that new, I'm giving a plug for our Dropbox folder. We're going to have that article available to our audience in the folder.
Oh, perfect.
Which Renee and Larry will post the link to, and I just wanted to mention that to everyone. Keep going, thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for that. So I was thinking, I started using dance in my classroom to talk about body language and portraiture and how people were relating in paintings of groups of people, but also again to think about architecture. You know, we didn't have Mount Vernon accessible to us, but we could look at the floor plan and think about how we would have moved through that space, in part by using dance. But of course, more recently, it's become very well known that Henry Ford, one of the reasons he was interested in squares and contras was because he was ragingly racist and he wanted to protect American culture from the influence of things like jazz, from the influence of Jewish people. He was anti-Semitic. He was just kind of a terrible person in a lot of ways, which as a historian, I'm not really surprised by that, but it makes it complicated to talk about what he did that was useful and good. So there's a concept that actually comes out of the same exact period that Henry Ford is active in, called the usable past. And it's a concept that's really useful for me because basically the idea of the usable past is that everyone, when we look at history, we pick and choose what we take out of it. We pick and choose what we want to learn from. And so for me, Henry Ford is exactly that kind of person. We can leave his anti-Semitism behind. We can leave his anti-Black sentiments behind. And we can take with us sort of, what do we learn from the spaces that he created? What do we do? I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about those things. I'm saying that we have a choice about what we use in the past. And I think that's a really important question for us to ask ourselves as dancers all the time is, you know, we are engaged in a tradition that has a history. What parts of that history are we looking at and what parts of that history are we ignoring? How are we choosing and what are our motivations for that? And I think that understanding how we're constructing a usable past actually involves not ignoring the things that we leave out, right? Actually saying, oh, we're leaving that out because, or, you know, we've left out that tradition of calling coming from African-American musicians. Maybe we should put that back in. And so being aware of what we're looking for is really important. So I was looking for dancing, and after I went to that Contra dance, I started looking dance up, as I said, and I found the Ann Arbor English dance community. And I went there, I went to dance weekends, I did all the dancing I could find. I was kind of, I was that enthusiastic, obsessed person. I even went to Timber Ridge. But in all this dancing, I was enjoying the dancing and I was not understanding a sense of community, particularly. So I was really shy. I was going to these dances that were clearly very strong communities. Everyone knew each other, no one knew me. People weren't unkind, but I would show up to the Looking Glass Contra dance in Lansing, for example, with a book. And at the break, I would sit in a corner and I would read my book until we started dancing again. And I wasn't trying to be antisocial, but I was pretty introverted. I went to Timber Ridge, a CDSS dance week for the first time in 2009. And again, I had this experience of loving the dancing and feeling like a little bit of an outsider. So anytime we weren't dancing, I just wandered around Timber Ridge by myself, taking pictures. And again, I think we have a photo that I jokingly said to Darlene and Lindsay when we were running through all of our tech stuff earlier. This tennis ball is kind of my alter ego at Timber Ridge. I was kind of alone. I was hanging out on the margins of the action, unless dancing was actually happening. And I wasn't unhappy there, but I didn't feel like I was part of a community. I just felt like I was dancing with people. Meanwhile, in Ann Arbor, I was going to the English dance regularly, and Ray Bantle was one of the main callers when I started. He was the person who first welcomed me. I walked in, and he said, "Oh, you're new. You know, have you danced before?" Kind of all these questions, and then he taught me how to set. And then he said, "Okay, you'll be fine. Go for it." And it was true. And in a few months, he said, "You know, you're really good at this. You should learn how to call." And the next thing I knew, there were three-ish of us, and we were in a classroom at Michigan State, and Ray was teaching us how to call. I was being a student again. It was weird because I was in my own classroom where I was usually the professor, and suddenly I was the student. But I was paying a lot of attention, not only to learning how to call, but also how he was teaching us. Ray is an incredibly good teacher and a very gentle human. And so I learned a lot from him about how to teach people how to call. And now for a few years, I've been running the Scissortail caller workshops in Oklahoma. And I hope that I do even half the job that Ray did for us. But I think my key takeaway from calling was that suddenly I understood myself as part of a community. I understood that I had a place. So going back to that idea of music is participatory, I was participating as a dancer, but as a caller, I suddenly understood where I belonged. I had a real sense that this is a way that I fit in. This is my jigsaw puzzle piece in the dance community. And that opened up a whole new thing for me. And I think I saw that Renee just posted the link to my caller workshop notes. And like I said, I run them for Scissortail Traditional Dance, which is the Oklahoma dance organization. We've been doing them on Zoom. So I have posted videos of those, and I think it's so important to share our knowledge and to kind of pass that on. So yeah, thing 4.
That's wonderful.
Mhm.
We have been having some questions, but I'm holding them because there's a lot of great stuff that Louise is talking about. So just hang on there. Okay. Oklahoma, community and leadership.
Yeah, so I use the word community. My friend Judith DeWitt, who's the president of Friends of Cecil Sharp House, she makes fun of me because she says I use the community way more than is rational. But for me, the dance community is why I still dance. It's why I'm still dancing even during a pandemic. And Oklahoma is really where that community coalesced for me. So I'd been calling English for maybe a year when I got a new job at Oklahoma State. I came here to Stillwater, Oklahoma to teach American and Native American art history. My dissertation had been on theories of race in American art, and so the opportunity to teach Native American art history in particular was exciting to me. But before I took the job, I checked to see the dance community and make sure that it existed. And so probably the first week that I was in Oklahoma, I was driving down to Oklahoma City. At the time, Scissortail was just an Oklahoma City organization. Now it's statewide. We dance in 4 different cities. But I walked into the English dance, and Carol Berry was the caller who ran it single-handedly at the time. And I introduced myself and I said, "I'm an English caller. I would love to call." And she is the most sweet human being, and didn't sort of look at me like, "Hello, crazy person who has walked into my dance and demanded to call." She was really excited that I was there, and she was excited that I was interested, and she has been a mentor to me for over a decade now. But she also said, "You know, we're actually losing one of our Contra dance callers. Do you call Contra?" And in Michigan, I was friends with Ed Vincent, who's a Contra dance caller, and he had just declared to me at a dance weekend, like, if you have been calling English, then you should also call Contra. It's easier. And so one afternoon we sat down with his CD player and one of his cards. It was Midwest Folklore by Oris Johnson. And he just sat me there and he made me go through it again and again until I could call it perfectly. with the music. And so when Carol said, "Are you a Contra caller?" I was like, well, I have called one Contra dance. I don't think that I'd actually called it to a human being. I think I had just called it to Ed. But luckily for me, we had a really enthusiastic president of Scissortail at that time, Joni McSpadden, and she organized caller workshops for Contra callers. And so again, there were a handful of us who were learning how to call Contra dances. After that, I'm going to condense sort of 10 years into 30 seconds. I did a ton of local calling. I started calling nationally. But that idea of community really came to the fore, because I would not have had the experiences and the practice and kind of the support as a caller that I had without the various people that I got to work with that helped me build a community and kind of fulfilled that promise of calling being a way that I could fit into a community. So in quick succession, I just want to run through some pictures of people who have helped give me community in Oklahoma. The first one is of the Ladies at Play, which is a band that no longer plays together, but we spent a long time going to various gigs. We went to JASNA events, the Jane Austen Society of North America in Dallas. We did that ball a couple of times. We worked with one of our community members to organize tea dances at he and his aunt's tea house. We did birthday parties for people. We did all kinds of things. So maybe we could put that photo up, Lindsay. So the Ladies at Play, you can see us in various guises. I said I was not into costumes, but when you do a JASNA event, you get a costume. So my amazing friend Ariel Kesweter made me a dress. That's the one you can see in the bottom picture. Yeah, we had a great time. And when Ladies at Play stopped playing together, they adopted one of our Contra dance musicians, Jacob Chen, who's in a band called Panda Stomp. And the next picture, that is Jacob and the rest of Panda Stomp at the upper left, and then Mary Mayhem, minus Ashley Green, who is in green in the Panda Stomp photo. But Mary Mayhem became our new English band, and they play for our dances now. And that's Shannon McDonald and Kathy Dagg and Jacob Chen in that Mary Mayhem photo. So we've worked together with them, and they do all our Zoom music. They have been incredibly supportive. And then the third photo in this list of photos is at some point, I don't even know how I got involved, but for many, many years now, I've been doing choreography for a Christmas production called Jane Austen's Christmas Cracker. And it is a participatory theater experience where the audience members get invited to dance with the cast. And so my job is to choreograph dances that just the cast does, but then also dances that they can get people to participate in. It's amazing and hilarious, and we've been doing that for a lot of years now. These days it's run through Oklahoma Shakespeare in the Park. And then the last photo is of the leadership team of a Contra affair. In 2011, we started a student club at Oklahoma State, and it was Contra dancing originally. These days we do all kinds of different dances, a lot of English, as well as Contra, but I guess these days we don't do anything at the moment, but in theory, we do all kinds of things. But this was at the CDSS Centennial Tour. They did a stop in Lawrence, Kansas, and we got funding from OSU to take the whole student team up there for that event. And yeah, so leadership became a really important part of my life in the community. And I joined the board of Scissortail, and so I became an organizer as well as a caller. And all of this leadership stuff led to, as Darlene mentioned in the bio that she did, really nice bio, thank you, at the beginning, the Judson Foster Award, which is a CDSS award that's intended to encourage leadership and new leaders in the English dance community. And thanks to the Judson Foster Award, Robin Hayden was able to bring me to English Week in 2016, where we did a class or a week-long workshop on the future of English country dance. And I called it ECD, The Next Generation, after Star Trek. But also thinking about how we as a group, it was a group of young dance leaders, kind of self-identified, who wanted to think about how we might bring English into the future. And for me, one of the key aspects of leadership I was learning from Scissortail, which was really different from the leadership opportunities I had in academia, was that it's really all about listening, about kind of collecting information from people and then giving them what maybe they don't even realize they need. And so our premise at English Week was we're going to do a workshop where we think about why we like English dancing, and then we look at what we like and we think about the motivating values behind that and put that together into a vision for how we might help English dancing survive in the future and flourish. So this is a handwritten list. We had a pad of paper and we would write on it each day of some of the things that people enjoy and that they see as the future of English country dance. And then by the end of the week, I collected, every day I collected our handwritten sheets of paper and kind of collated them and tried to aggregate our the lessons that we'd learned. And so by the end, we had a list of values that had come out of our discussion. We had a list of values that we had discovered in those things that we valued overtly. There were kind of these skills that were at the heart of all of them. And so at the end of it, I said, okay, here's a proposition for us. We all love different things about ECD. We're never going to agree about what the best thing about English dancing is. But the communal values that make those things possible are universal. And so we might not all like the same things about adaptability and teamwork and forgiveness, but those values are guiding why we're attracted to this in the first place. They're the things that allow us to develop our skills or to feel safe or to embrace diversity, all the things in that first list. So we had this great kind of amazing week experience, and at the same time, I'm still a complete introvert. And so when I agreed to do it, I had written to CDSS. They said, kind of, what do you need to make this workshop a success? And I said, to be honest, one of the things I need is my own cabin. I don't know if that exists. I had never been to Pine Woods before, but I was like, if I can live alone, that would be such a gift to me. And so when I arrived at Pine Woods, they handed me my housing sheet. I didn't know where I was going to live until I got there. And the name of my cabin was Kitty Alone. And yeah, we'll look at this picture. And I just wanted to say, you know, feeling supported by your community doesn't always look the same. And the way that I felt when I saw this cabin was so held by my community. It was unreal. So Kitty Alone, always my favorite place. Darlene.
Yeah, we're going to bring up a question.
Great. We'll just take a moment to bring him on board.
Oh, great.
All righty, here we go. Kara and Todd, welcome back.
Hi, Louise.
Hiya.
I was wondering, do you have any advice as a caller of any tips of how to grab the attention of the dancers and hold it?
That is a great question. And I think it really depends on the dancers, which is not as much of a cop-out as it sounds. In some cases, I mean, that idea of listening, I think that in some cases you don't even try, right? You allow the dancers to come to you. And so you trust that everyone kind of knows how the flow of an evening goes. And when they're ready to dance, they'll kind of hush up and they will turn to you and be like, okay, we're ready. Are you going to call a dance now? In other cases, if it's been going on a long time and I see some people are antsy, but most people are not paying attention yet, I'll turn to the band and say, can you play a bit of our next tune? And kind of that is, I think, a subtle way of signaling to people that we're going to start again. Those are both things that I would do at an English dance. I think in Contra, you have a little more leeway to kind of say over the mic, like, hey, we're going to get started now. But one strategy that I really love, I learned from Will Mentor, which is you just start teaching. And you might have to start again, but it's actually faster to teach the first 2 figures of a dance twice than to try to get people to kind of come together by saying, hey, let's dance now, take hands 4. If you say take hands 4 more than twice, then I think you're just kind of, you're sending a signal that you are not in control of the room. Whereas if you say take hands 4 twice and then start teaching, everyone will catch up. And if they don't, you start again and it's still faster. So yeah, I mean, those are the things that I do. I remember when I very first started calling, like literally maybe the first time I ever called in Oklahoma City at a Contra dance, I was pretty stressed and frustrated and nervous. And I said, be quiet. And people came up to me and they were like, never do that again. Like, just don't. And they were totally right. Like, oh my gosh, don't tell people what to do that way, you know? So that was a moment where, you know, my own lesson to myself, like, we're all on the same team, we're all working together. I had forgotten it and I was very me focused. And I think reminding myself, like, the only person in a hurry here is me, right? And if they're not in a hurry, why should I be in a hurry?
All right. Thanks very much, Louise. That's very, very useful.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Louise, before we move on to thing 5, I just wanted to touch on your community had some interesting stuff going on when you were transitioning to some sort of gender-free calling. You want to talk about that just a little bit before we move on?
Yeah, and it actually leads right into thing 5. So that's perfect. So I was calling for the Stillwater group for a Contra affair. And they, this is actually kind of about listening too, right? They were, listening is not always listening to words. It's sometimes watching your dancers. And our organizers they were dancing in ways that were not traditionally gendered, I guess. Like, they were dancing with people who are the same gender, or they were just dancing with whoever they wanted to, basically. And at one of our organizing meetings, they said, hey, what is this like that we hear about alternate role terms? And I said, okay, well, the options that are being discussed out in the caller world are larks and ravens at the time, or jets and rubies was popular. And they're like, oh no, those are not for us. We want to go with alternate role terms, but we don't like the ones that everyone else is using. So I said, you know what? We could make up our own. And so we brainstormed a little while, but then we realized that we were going to need buy-in from the dancers as a whole, like the 5 of us, or however many there were sitting there. We didn't want to make that decision on behalf of the whole dance community in Stillwater. So what we ended up doing, and it was actually a suggestion from Mark Gallipo, was we had a dance, and the first half of the dance I called Gents and Ladies, as we had been doing. And then in the break, we had a sheet where you could list all the, we listed the options that we'd brainstormed, and then you could add your own for alternate role terms. And my only rule was it had to be 1 syllable and 2 syllables, because that would fit into my calling. Because then after the break, my job was to switch over to whatever we voted on. So we did Gents and Ladies, we took a break, we voted Chutes and Ladders won. And so the second half of the dance I called Chutes and Ladders. And it was amazing. You know, we'd just done a whole half a dance with gendered terms. And yet in the second half, the exact same group of dancers, they started turning to each other and saying, which role do you want to dance? And people asked totally new and different people who to dance. And it was, I mean, it was really moving, actually. It was amazing. And I was reminded when Chip last week was talking about, you know, in queer communities, they didn't care about the role terms. For people like us who were in the middle of nowhere and who are stuck in these very gendered communities, it does matter. Changing those roles changes how people dance and behave and treat each other. And that's really important. And that does lead straight to thing 5.
All right. This is great stuff. It's, I wish we had 2 hours. Well, oh, we do. So we'll talk about some of this other stuff in that section. Thing 5, England, positionality.
So, you know, if I went in chronological order, I guess England should have been first, but it's last because I had a huge insight just a couple of years ago. I go back to England every summer, but then when I was on sabbatical, I went for the whole year, basically. I went for 10 months. Already one of the things that I wanted to put in this England section, before I was a dancer, I was, you know, listening to folk music, and I came across, my sister actually took me to a concert by Jim Murray, and I think we have an image of the album cover of the concert that I went to. It was at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London in 2003, and he had just released this album, Sweet England, which was, it won all kinds of awards, but it's basically traditional British ballads, kind of played with electronic music, with rock kind of influences, with all kinds of stuff. And he was kind of thinking about how to make folk feel more contemporary. And so that kind of stayed with me. A couple of the songs on there are actually dances. And so I have messed around with dancing to his tracks, although it doesn't really work very well, but whatever. Has always been in the back of my mind as an English dancer. And then in 2017-18, I went to stay in London for my whole sabbatical year. I had a ton of gigs. I went to workshops at Cecil Sharp House. One of the things I discovered at Cecil Sharp House, I think it was I can't remember what the theme of it was, but it was basically like teaching English dance or something. But there was a workshop run by this group called Folk Dance Remixed. And they are fascinating. They take Morris dancing and combine it with street dance, and they do maypole stuff, and they basically go out into communities. So we have a photo that I took at Borough Market. They did a May Day event, and so they're sort of like a Morris team that doesn't do Morris dances. They do invented choreography that combines kind of hip hop and Morris and various things. But as you can even see from their costumes, they have this very strong traditional element. So again, sort of thinking about what does this mean, this genre? And I'm not about to say that I did anything innovative in terms of reinventing English country dance. But what I did do is I was calling pretty regularly, both for Friends of Cecil Sharp House and for Camden English Folk Dance Club. And that's a bit of a misnomer because in England, a lot of the local clubs mix Contra and English together. And so I was doing a mixture of things. But at Camden in particular, we had these, a couple of men who refused to dance together. And they would get really annoyed when 2 women would dance together because they were like, well, now you're preventing us from dancing. We have to sit out. And I said, why don't you dance together? And they said, well, because men don't dance together. And I was like, well, but what's really the issue here? And again, listening, right? Like, how do we understand this? Is it just, I don't want to touch a guy? It wasn't that at all. Like, they touch other men all the time in dancing, right? It was literally that they did not want to be called ladies. And so I said, okay, well, I am not going to get away with chutes and ladders at Camden English Folk Dance Club, but I could get away with positional calling. And so I spent the whole year calling positionally, calling Contra and English both, and really working out how to make that work, how to make it transparent, how to make it accessible. And it was sort of like when we went to chutes and ladders in Stillwater, immediately people's behavior changed. And as soon as I said, you know, there are no roles in this dance, those same guys started dancing together. And it was like the community was transformed, and it was so simple. And so, yeah, ever since I've been sort of a spokesperson for positional calling as much as I can. I got to call YDW with positional English calling. I called Contras all over the country at this point with positional calling. I have a couple of upcoming workshops. A lot of people have asked me to do workshops on positional calling, which feels a little weird when we don't have human bodies. But enough people have asked that we're going to do one. I think the first one's on October 17th, and that'll be English focused. And then I'll do another one. We haven't picked a date yet, but it'll be in late October, early November for Contra specifically. And then I promised I would come back to my idea of positional dancing. So I'll just end on the note that in my Wednesday walkthroughs, I have started describing what we do as positional dancing, which connects to positional calling. And I think it all works together and actually strengthens our ability to dance. It's a skill that we're going to bring back to the dance floor when we dance together again. So yeah, positional calling for me is, again, this idea of the usable past. How do we retain the parts of our tradition that have value and build on it like it's a living tradition, because it is, which goes back to the idea that it's our responsibility to see all the possibilities in the past and make them work for dancers in the present.
Well, this has been great stuff, and I'm looking forward to the after talk because I know there's several different things that we're going to talk about in there as well. Thank you, Louise. Let me ask you before we go to the wrap-up stuff, what's your favorite dance?
My favorite dance is Barberini's Tambourine.
Ah,
never gonna
great.
get tired of it.
That is a great dance. And are you a tea drinker?
So I have to admit, I am not a tea drinker, but my grandfather was a food chemist, and he, for many years, worked to develop PG Tips. And so PG Tips is my official tea of choice, and I never drink any tea.
That's cool. PG Tips always reminds me of England. Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling us this. I love the fact that you're a teacher and you taught us so many different things about what goes into this thought process. We want to talk more about the community stuff and things like that in the after talk. Thank you, Louise. Thank you to my 5 Things team, Lindsay Verbal in the background, Renee Turner on Zoom, Larry Hansen on Facebook, and with our helpers, Reed Wilson, Kara King. She puts all the work into those great bios, so shout out to Kara. And Linda Nelson. Thank you to Colin Hume, who's archived all of our web chats on his website. We now have, including Louise, 29 folks over the last many months. So, and a big thank you to everyone who's been making donations, and we really appreciate it. It helps with the expenses. The After Talk link is being posted right now. Coming up next week on December, right? Not there yet. September 22nd, we have Lisa Greenleaf. Lisa has called Contra Square English country dances in New England for 35 years, as well as at festivals and dance camps. You know, she's created color and leadership seminars, and I don't know anyone who doesn't love her. Registration is open now. If you don't know her, come. You'll know why everybody loves her. Coming up this Saturday, finally, I've been talking about it for a month. We have our 3rd Saturday Historical Dance web chat with Paul Cooper. And boy, oh boy, is he fun. I swear, every time I talk to him, we just want to hear more. He's so energetic. He's so much fun. He really loves it. He makes it really fun. So definitely join us for that. Coming on Saturday, October 3rd, Concepts in Iyengar Yoga for Dancers class with Anna Rain. And that registration is going to be on sale by tomorrow evening on our website. So look for that. The class will be open. And join us for tea time on Thursdays at 5. It's a lot of fun if you're just looking to make some new friends or just touch and, you know, talk to people and stuff. It's great for that. Drop us an email. We'll tell you more. I just want to let you guys know now that since they announced when the presidential debate is going to be on, we are postponing Gene Morrow. He did not want to be on during the presidential debate, and I don't blame him. We're not going to do a talk that night. I think everybody's going to have their attention then. And then, of course, on November 3rd, the election, we're not going to have a talk on that night either. So we feel that everybody will be focused on that. Gene's talk is being postponed, should be October 13th. And we'll let you know about that soon. Let's see, other events being posted coming up at Scissortail. They do their dance 2 times a month, so we're going to post a link for that. And we will be closing, I think. Oh, one more thing I posted in the talk, Louise's Zoom ECD tips video. I love this thing. This was great. Louise did this really early on when we were all kind of, you know, wondering like, oh, how do we do this? Is this working? I really loved what she developed there. So I wanted to make sure you all had a link to that if you haven't seen it. I thought it was great. Donations, Scissortail Traditional Dance Society. And, you know, it really is a great place to donate. Also, the musicians who they're helping to give some donations to, they're putting to work, they are making the music available for us that's going to be playing in the exit music. This is so great. Scissortail and Merry Mayhem. It's available for download, the whole album from the Scissortail's July 24th Zoom dance. We are closing on the tune Beach Spring. The musicians Jacob Chen, Kathy Dagg, Ashley Green, Shonda McDonald, and it's the Scissortail July 2020 dance, and it's available for download. So thank you guys so much for that. We really appreciate it. It's very kind of you to support the community in this way. And we will go out with this tune and see you all in the after talk in 2 minutes. Bye.